The wedding where I disappeared. Some humiliations happen in private, behind closed doors, in whispers, in sideways glances. Mine happened under crystal chandeliers, in front of 200 guests, with a microphone. My name is Stella Frost. I'm 32 years old. I'm a trauma nurse. I've stitched strangers back together at 3 in the morning. I've stood steady while families collapsed in hospital hallways. But nothing prepared me for the moment my father tried to erase me at my own brother's wedding. It was supposed to be Daniel's night. Soft gold lights draped across the ballroom ceiling, white roses lining the aisle, a string quartet playing something gentle and expensive, the kind of wedding people describe as perfect. The bride was glowing. Daniel looked proud. My stepmother, Diane, floated from table to table, smiling too wide, correcting centerpieces, making sure every photographer caught her good side. And my father? He had already had 3 whiskeys before dinner. I noticed. I always notice. When you grow up in a house where tension hums beneath the floorboards, you learn to read rooms like vital signs. And that night, the pressure was building. The speeches began after dessert. Daniel thanked everyone. The bride cried happy tears. Even my father clapped. Then he stood up again. No one expected a second speech. He reached for the microphone slowly, deliberately. I remember the way the light hit his face. It made him look older than 58. Harder. Before we end tonight, he said, there's something this family needs to know. A few guests chuckled, thinking it was another sentimental story. I felt my stomach drop, because I recognized that tone. It was the same tone he used the first time he stopped calling me sweetheart. The same tone he used the night he moved me into the basement when I was 14. Calm. Detached. Decided. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't look at the bride. He looked at me. She's not my daughter. The room didn't react immediately. That's the strange thing about shock. It needs a second to register. A fork clinked against a plate. Someone laughed nervously. My aunt blinked like she hadn't heard correctly. And then he repeated it. I'm done pretending. Margaret wasn't faithful. Margaret, my mother. Dead for 19 years. He said her name like an accusation. Like she could defend herself. Like she wasn't buried in a cemetery 30 miles away with a headstone that still says beloved wife and mother. The music stopped. Completely. The air thickened. Daniel stepped forward. Dad, what are you doing? But my father kept going. I've carried this long enough, he said. This family deserves honesty. Honesty. I almost smiled, because I knew something he didn't. 10 feet away, beside the memorial display of old family photos, sat a simple blue box. It had been placed there intentionally, quietly, by my grandmother, Eleanor Frost, 3 years before she died. She had pressed my hands between hers and told me, don't go looking for trouble, Stella, but if trouble comes to you, your answer will be waiting. I didn't understand her then. I do now. Back in the ballroom, all eyes were on me. 200 witnesses. Waiting. For tears. For denial. For a scene. Diane was already holding a tissue. Already. Her eyes were glossy but not surprised. Never surprised. She gently placed her hand on my father's arm like this was something painful she had begged him not to reveal. The performance was seamless. 18 years of preparation. Because this didn't start tonight. It started when I was 13, at my mother's funeral. I remember standing beside the casket in a black dress my mother had bought for my school dance. No one thought to buy me something for a funeral. My father stood 3 feet away. He didn't reach for my hand. Didn't look at me. Just stared at the coffin like it had betrayed him. 4 months later, Diane entered our house. 6 weeks after that, my bedroom became hers, and I moved to the basement, concrete walls, a single high window. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself, grief makes people strange, but grief wasn't what moved me downstairs. Doubt was. Because one night, I heard Diane whisper something to him in the kitchen. She doesn't have your eyes, Richard. Silence. Margaret was lonely when you traveled. More silence. And that silence was the beginning of 18 years of distance. He stopped looking at me after that, stopped attending my school events, stopped correcting anyone who hinted I didn't quite fit, and I worked harder. Perfect grades, part-time jobs, polite, quiet, helpful. It never fixed anything, because Diane wasn't planting weeds, she was planting weather, slow, steady, impossible to grab, until it felt like truth. Back in the wedding hall, my father's voice cracked slightly. I should have said this years ago. The bride was crying now, not from joy, but humiliation. Daniel looked torn between loyalty and disbelief. A cousin had their phone out. Recording. I felt the heat crawl up my spine. But it wasn't shame. It was something else. Something steady. Because I knew the truth wasn't fragile. It was sealed, documented, protected. Inside that blue box. My grandmother had made sure of it. She had arranged a family health screening years ago. Heart disease ran in our bloodline. Everyone gave samples, including my father, including me. She never told him she asked for one more test, a paternity test, not out of suspicion, out of protection. She trusted my mother. She just didn't trust the whispers. And when the results came back, she sealed them with a letter and a legal document. Then she hid them, because she knew Diane would search for anything that threatened her version of the story. Diane had torn through closets after Grandma died. Every drawer, every cabinet. She never found the box, because Grandma hid it inside something ordinary, a dusty old shoebox behind winter coats. Power hides in plain sight. My father was still speaking. I can't keep pretending she's mine. The words hit harder than I expected, even knowing what I knew, even being prepared. Because no matter how strong you become, there is something inside every child that wants their parent to choose them. He wasn't choosing me. He was choosing the lie. Publicly, at my brother's wedding. I slowly stood up. Chairs scraped around me. Diane's hand tightened on his sleeve. She saw it in my face. That I wasn't collapsing. I wasn't running. I wasn't begging. And that frightened her. Because bullies thrive on reaction, not calm. I picked up my clutch, walked toward the memorial table. Every step echoed louder than the music had. Someone whispered, "Where is she going?" I didn't answer. I didn't look at my father. Because for the first time in 18 years, I wasn't trying to be seen. I was about to show them. My fingers brushed against the edge of the blue box. Dusty. Unremarkable. Ordinary. Just like Grandma intended. I lifted it. And when I turned back toward the ballroom, Diane's face had lost all color. She recognized it. She had searched for this. For years. My father stared at the box like it was nothing. He had no idea what he'd just awakened. I walked back to the center of the room, set the box on the gift table, and looked directly at him. "If we're telling the truth tonight, Dad," I said quietly, "let's tell all of it." The room fell completely silent. I lifted the lid, and inside was the thing that would either destroy me or destroy the lie that stole 18 years of my life. I reached for the first envelope, and that's when Diane finally spoke. "Stella," she said sharply, voice trembling for the first time. "Don't." But it was too late. Because tonight, I wasn't the girl in the basement anymore, and someone in that ballroom was about to lose everything. The letter. She never got to read. "Stella, don't." Diane's voice cracked across the ballroom like a glass under pressure. For the first time in 18 years, it wasn't sweet. It wasn't soft. It was afraid. I held the blue box in both hands. It looked ordinary. Faded corners. A half-worn logo. The kind of thing people throw away without thinking. But my grandmother had once told me something I didn't understand at the time. Power doesn't need to look powerful. 200 guests were no longer whispering. They were staring. The bride's mascara had started to run. Daniel stood frozen beside her, one hand halfway extended toward me, unsure whether to stop me or support me. My father hadn't moved. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the box like it was a snake about to strike. I set it down on the gift table. The sound of cardboard touching polished wood echoed louder than it should have. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the lid. Inside were three things: a sealed letter in my grandmother's handwriting, a manila envelope, and a folded legal document. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because this wasn't just proof. This was the last defense my grandmother ever prepared for me, and I had promised her I would never open it unless I had to. I looked at my father. "You said this family deserves honesty," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. "Let's start with Grandma." Diane took a step forward. "This isn't the place." "No," I interrupted, still calm. "You're right. A wedding isn't the place for lies." Silence swallowed the room. I picked up the letter. The envelope was yellowed slightly at the edges. My grandmother's handwriting curved gently across the front. "For Stella? If needed." I broke the seal. My hands trembled just once before I steadied them. The first line blurred because my eyes filled with tears instantly. I swallowed and read aloud. "My dearest Stella, if you are reading this, it means someone has tried to make you feel like you do not belong." A sharp inhale came from somewhere behind me. I continued. "I am sorry I could not stop it while I was alive. I tried. But some people prefer stories that protect their comfort over truths that protect their children." Diane's face drained of color. My father shifted. "Your mother, Margaret, loved your father deeply. She was faithful. She was kind. And she never deserved the whispers that followed her illness." The word illness landed softly in the room. My mother had died of ovarian cancer when I was 13. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. 8 months of watching her disappear. 8 months of my father sleeping in a chair beside her hospital bed. I remember thinking grief would make us closer. I didn't know it would make him vulnerable. And vulnerability, in the wrong hands, becomes clay. I kept reading. "I have heard what Diane has suggested. I have watched your father grow distant, and I will not allow doubt to erase my granddaughter." A murmur moved through the guests. Diane's nails dug into her clutch. My father whispered. Mom was confused near the end. That broke something in me. I lowered the paper slowly. "My grandmother was sharper at 80 than most people here tonight," I said evenly. "Including you." A few heads nodded. I saw it. The shift. The first crack in Diane's control. I lifted the second envelope. This one had a logo printed on the corner. Hartford Genomics. 3 years ago, my grandmother had organized a family heart screening. Heart disease ran deep in our bloodline. My grandfather had died at 61. We all gave blood samples, including my father, including me. No one thought twice about it, but my grandmother had. She had requested one additional test, a paternity confirmation. Not because she doubted my mother, because she understood how doubt spreads, and she believed in facts. I slid the paper from the envelope. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. I read the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. No dramatic gasp, no shouting, just silence, heavy, expanding. My father blinked once, twice. His face drained slowly of color. I stepped closer and held the document out toward him. "I am your daughter," I said softly, not angry. Not triumphant, just tired. "I have always been your daughter." He took the paper with shaking hands. His lips moved as he read it, then read it again. Diane's voice came fast and sharp. "That can be fabricated. Anyone can print something." "It's verifiable," I said calmly. "The lab stores records." "You can call them tomorrow. We can retest. I'll pay for it." Diane stopped speaking because she knew. She knew the risk of truth. My father looked at her slowly. "You told me." His voice cracked. "You told me she wasn't mine." Diane's eyes flickered rapidly, calculating. "I believed it," she said. "Margaret was alone when you traveled. I was protecting you." Protecting. The word twisted in my chest. 18 years of distance, of basement bedrooms, of missed graduations, of quiet rejection, all built on protection. My father's shoulders collapsed inward. He sat down abruptly, like his legs could no longer hold him. The room watched him crumble. But I didn't move toward him. For 18 years, I moved toward him every time he pulled away. Tonight, I stayed still. Diane tried one last time. "This is emotional manipulation," she said, louder now. "She's jealous. She's always been jealous of." Enough. The word didn't come from me. It came from Daniel, my brother, the groom. He stepped forward, standing between us. "I won't let you do this tonight," he said to Diane quietly. "Not at my wedding." That was the second crack. The first was doubt. The second was isolation. Because Diane thrived when she had allies, when people nodded, when silence protected her. Now silence was turning against her. I picked up the final document, the folded legal paper. 4 pages. My grandmother's handwriting in the margins. "Original with attorney," she had written. I opened it. "This," I said calmly, "is a codicil to my grandmother's will." Another ripple of murmurs. I read the section she underlined. "I, Eleanor Marie Frost, being of sound mind, leave the residence at 14 Maple Hill Road to my granddaughter, Stella Margaret Frost, in full and unconditional ownership." The bride covered her mouth. Someone whispered. "Oh my God." I continued. "My son Richard has been unduly influenced in matters concerning his firstborn. I leave the house to Stella, so she will always have a place where no one can make her feel unwanted." The words felt like armor sliding into place. Diane's lips parted. "That's not valid. It was notarized," I said. "2 witnesses. Filed." Daniel looked at my father. "Dad, is that true?" My father couldn't answer. He was staring at the DNA result like it was a mirror reflecting 18 lost years. "You hid it," he whispered to Diane. She didn't respond. She just stood there, suddenly very small. The audience had shifted completely now. Not toward me. Away from her. Power doesn't leave loudly. It leaves quietly. I looked around the ballroom. At relatives who had avoided eye contact with me for years. At cousins who had believed the whispers. At friends who had accepted the narrative without question. "I never wanted revenge," I said. "I just wanted to stop disappearing." My father finally looked up at me. And in his eyes, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I saw doubt. Not about me. About himself. But even as the truth settled over the room, even as Diane's control slipped through her fingers, I realized something painful. The documents could prove biology. They could prove ownership. They could prove deception. But they could not give me back 18 years. And as my father slowly rose to his feet, eyes red, voice broken, I knew what he was about to say. The word every child waits for. Sorry. But I also knew something else. Sorry might not be enough. Because some fractures don't heal just because the truth is spoken. And the real question wasn't whether I was his daughter. The real question was, after everything, did I still want to be? The silence. After impact, for a long time, nobody moved. The music had stopped mid-note. A waiter stood frozen beside the cake table, still holding a knife in the air. Truth doesn't explode, it lands. And then everyone waits to see who survives it. My father was still standing in the center of the ballroom, the DNA report trembling in his hand. 99.998%. He read it once, twice. His jaw tightened like he was trying to hold something inside. Across the room, someone whispered, "Is this real?" A glass slipped from a guest's fingers and shattered near the bar. The sound cracked the silence. And suddenly, it wasn't cinematic anymore. It was messy. It was humiliating. It was real. Daniel stepped forward first. "Dad," he said quietly but firmly. "Enough." His bride grabbed his hand. Her voice shook. "Can we please not do this tonight?" That line cut deeper than anything else, because she was right. This was supposed to be joy. Instead, it had become an autopsy. My father looked at her. For a moment, shame flickered across his face. Then he looked back at the paper. "I was afraid," he said. The room leaned in. "Afraid she wasn't mine." There it was. Not afraid of betrayal. afraid of being wrong. Because if he was wrong, then he had spent 18 years punishing his own child. A drunk uncle near the back muttered, "Jesus!" under his breath. Someone else quietly said, "This is insane." Reality had returned. Diane stepped forward, voice controlled but tightening. "Richard, you're overwhelmed. This is emotional manipulation. We need to review this privately." He didn't look at her, not even once. That was new. I watched her notice it. Her confidence wavered. Just slightly. She scanned the room, looking for someone. Anyone. No one stepped in. Because manipulation works best when people stay neutral. Neutral was gone. My father lowered himself into a chair. Not dramatically, not collapsing. Just sitting like a man who suddenly felt older than he was. "I told people," he whispered. "I told people she wasn't mine." He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the tablecloth. I felt something sharp move through my chest. Because now I understood something. The damage wasn't just distance. It was narrative. He had rewritten me in rooms I wasn't in. And I had been living with the consequences. Daniel knelt slightly beside him. "Why didn't you just test it?" he asked. Simple question. 18 years too late. My father exhaled slowly. "Because if it came back like this," he held up the paper, "I would have to admit what I let happen. That honesty was ugly. And real." Diane's voice changed, less polished, more desperate. "You're all acting like I invented this." Margaret wasn't perfect. There it was. The sting. The parting blade. The room shifted again. I felt it instantly. Doubt trying to re-enter. My father looked up sharply. "Don't. Just one word." But it stopped her. The bride stepped forward unexpectedly. "Please," she said, tears running now. "This is my wedding." Her mascara had smudged. Her bouquet was still clutched in her hands. "That image will stay with me forever," Joy interrupted. Diane grabbed her clutch tightly. "You think she's innocent?" she said, looking directly at my father. "Ask yourself why your mother felt the need to test it in the first place." There it was. The final attempt. Plant the seed again, even in retreat. My father's face hardened. My mother trusted Margaret more than I did. That landed heavier than any scream could have. And Diane understood. She wasn't losing an argument. She was losing control. She turned toward the exit. But before she reached the doors, she stopped, looked at me, and said quietly, so quietly most people didn't hear it, "You won tonight. But families don't recover from this." Then she left. Not dramatic, but not defeated either. That line lingered in the air long after the doors closed. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. Truth heals. But it also scars. Music started again. Softly. Like someone testing whether it was safe. Guests began sitting down slowly. No one knew what to do. Daniel looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't do this." But something in his eyes had changed. He was recalculating family. So was everyone else. My father stood up again, walked toward me. 3 steps. The same distance he stood from me at my mother's funeral. History repeating. But different this time. "I was wrong," he said. "No excuses. No justifications. Just that. I should have protected you. Should have. Not did. Should have. The difference matters." I felt tears rising, not because I was healed, but because I was tired. "You protected your comfort," I said quietly. He didn't argue. That was the biggest change of all. Around us, waiters began clearing plates. Someone awkwardly clapped near the back, unsure if it was over. It wasn't. Not even close. Because this wasn't just about DNA, or humiliation, or apologies. This was about legal documents. Inheritance. A marriage that might not survive this. And a woman who had just walked out promising damage. I picked up the blue box again, held it against my chest. Armor. Daniel returned to the dance floor reluctantly. The bride wiped her face and forced a smile for photographs. But the wedding album would never tell this story. Only we would. As the night thinned out and guests began whispering goodbyes, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stepped outside onto the balcony to answer. Miss Frost? An older male voice said. Yes? This is Gerald Alderman, your grandmother's attorney. My stomach dropped. I believe, he continued carefully, that certain documents were intercepted after Eleanor's passing. If what I'm hearing tonight is accurate, we need to speak immediately. There may be legal implications. Legal implications. The words felt heavier than everything that came before. I looked back through the ballroom doors. At my father sitting alone. At Daniel trying to salvage his wedding night. At the empty space where Diane had stood. The damage wasn't just emotional. It was structural. And it was only beginning. Because the blue box didn't just contain proof. It contained a decision. And once that decision moved forward, nothing in this family would ever look the same again. The basement years. When people think betrayal begins, they imagine a single moment. A sentence, a discovery, a slammed door. But betrayal doesn't begin loudly. It begins quietly, in small rearrangements. 4 months after my mother's funeral, my father brought Diane home. This is Diane, he said. She's a friend from work. She wore soft perfume and a careful smile. Her daughter, Lauren, stood slightly behind her, 9 years old, blonde curls, shy but curious. I was 13, still sleeping in the bedroom my mother painted pale yellow, still expecting grief to pass like weather. It didn't. It transformed. Within 6 weeks, Diane was spending nights. Within 8, she moved in. Within 10, my bedroom was no longer mine. She's younger, Diane said gently while folding Lauren's pink comforter onto my old bed. She needs the sunlight. Sunlight. Like I didn't. Like I hadn't grown up watching that maple tree outside my window change with every season. I moved to the basement. Concrete walls. One small window at ceiling height. A faint smell of damp cardboard. My father said it was temporary. I nodded like I believed him. But temporary things don't last 18 years. The first night in the basement, I taped my honor roll certificate to the wall beside the light switch. It looked small there, like proof nobody was checking. Upstairs, I could hear laughter. Diane's voice blending with my father's. It wasn't cruel. It was normal. That's what made it hurt. They weren't trying to push me out. They just weren't trying to keep me in. A month later, my grandmother, Eleanor, came to visit. She walked through the house slowly. Her eyes missed nothing. When she reached the basement door, she paused. Where's Stella's room? She asked. In the basement, Diane replied smoothly. She wanted more privacy. My grandmother didn't respond. She simply walked down the stairs, looked at the concrete walls, the single window. The mattress pushed against one side. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned to me. This is still my house, she said quietly. Remember that. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. The whispers started 2 years later. I was 15. One night, I went upstairs for water. The kitchen light was on. Diane's voice was low, careful. Have you ever really looked at her, Richard? Silence. She doesn't have your jaw. More silence. Margaret was alone when you traveled. The refrigerator hummed. My father didn't defend my mother. He didn't defend me. He peeled the label off his beer bottle slowly. And that was the night he stopped looking at me the same way. Not angry, not distant at first, just uncertain. Uncertainty is powerful. It changes how someone stands near you, how long they hold eye contact, how quickly they withdraw their hand. From that night on, something shifted. And I felt it. Children always feel it. I tried harder. Cooked dinner 3 nights a week, cleaned without being asked, kept my grades perfect, volunteered for extra shifts at school events. If love was earned, I would earn it. If belonging required excellence, I would be excellent. It didn't matter. Because Diane wasn't attacking directly. She was building atmosphere. At Christmas one year, Lauren had 12 gifts under the tree. I had one. A scarf. The tag said, "From Dad." The handwriting was Diane's. My father smiled at Lauren opening her presents. He didn't notice me watching. Or maybe he did. And looked away. When I turned 18, I was accepted into a nursing program. I rehearsed the conversation 6 times in the basement mirror. Dad, I got in. That's great, sweetheart. I could use some help with tuition. I imagined the pride in his eyes. I imagined him saying he believed in me. Reality was quieter. I'll think about it, he said, not looking up from the newspaper. A week later, Diane announced Lauren would attend a private academy. Full tuition, new laptop, uniform fittings. My father beamed at her across the dinner table. You're going to do great, kiddo. I got loans. 2 part-time jobs. 4 hours of sleep most nights. My father called 3 times in 4 years. Each time the same question. When are you graduating? Not to attend, just to know when I'd be gone. Graduation day arrived. White coat, pinned badge. My name announced clearly. I scanned the crowd. He wasn't there. He and Diane had flown to Florida for Lauren's ceremony the same weekend. In the 3rd row, clapping louder than anyone. My grandmother. Afterward, she took me to lunch. Grilled cheese and tomato soup at the diner she'd loved for 40 years. She slid a small gold pendant across the table. Your mother's, she said. Wear it close. I've worn it every day since. I didn't know then there was a folded note hidden inside its clasp. I wouldn't discover that until years later. The basement taught me something important. You can survive invisibility. But it changes you. It makes you observant, self-contained, independent in ways that don't look soft. By the time Diane perfected her narrative, by the time my father publicly declared doubt, I had already lived 18 years feeling slightly displaced. The wedding didn't create that wound. It exposed it. Back at the reception, standing on the balcony after the attorney's call, the cold air hit my face sharply. Legal implications. Those words echoed. Because the house wasn't just sentimental, it was structural. And if Diane had intercepted documents, this wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was something else. Something deliberate. Something strategic. I looked through the glass doors again. My father was sitting alone. Daniel was dancing stiffly. The bride was smiling for cameras she'd never be able to look at the same way again. Diane's words lingered. Families don't recover from this. Maybe she was right. Maybe some families don't recover. They reorganize, they fracture, they reveal. But they don't return to what they were. And as I held the blue box closer to my chest, I realized something. The basement years didn't just make me invisible. They made me strong. Strong enough to survive truth. Strong enough to enforce it. But strength has consequences. Because once the legal process begins, once wills are read, once intercepted letters are uncovered, this won't stay inside a ballroom. It will move into courtrooms. And when it does, someone is going to lose more than reputation. The intercepted will. By morning, the wedding photos were already online. Filtered. Cropped. Smiling. No one would know what happened between the champagne toast and the cake cutting. But by 9:12 a.m., the story had moved somewhere else. My phone buzzed again. Gerald Alderman. My grandmother's attorney. His office smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Heavy oak desk, framed certificates. The kind of room where consequences sit upright. He didn't waste time. Miss Frost, your grandmother amended her will 3 months before her death. My pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. Amended how? He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies. Official seals, signatures I recognized. Eleanor Frost had left the house to me. Her investment portfolio, split between Daniel and me. A handwritten letter to be delivered only if paternity is formally questioned. I stared at that last line. Only if paternity is formally questioned. She anticipated this? I asked. Mr. Alderman adjusted his glasses. She suspected tension. She was very precise. Precise? That sounded like Grandma. What about my father? He was removed as primary beneficiary in the amendment. The room felt smaller. Not because of the inheritance. Because of the intention. Grandma had seen something forming long before I did. "There's more," he said. He opened another envelope. "These were found in a separate file drawer after your grandmother's passing. They were not submitted during probate." "Not submitted. Why not?" "They were removed." "Removed." My stomach tightened. By whom? He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't need to. Diane had been helping organize paperwork after the funeral. Helpful. Organized. Strategic. Inside the envelope were 3 letters. One addressed to me, one to my father, one to whomever questioned Stella's legitimacy. I almost laughed at that. Grandma didn't believe in subtlety. "Is this illegal?" I asked. "If someone knowingly withheld estate documents?" He folded his hands. "Yes." There it was. Not emotional damage. Legal damage. Real consequences. I drove home slowly. Not to my apartment. To the house. Grandma's house. My house. The driveway still had wedding cars parked unevenly from last night. Daniel's car was there. So was my father's. Diane's was gone. Interesting. Inside, the air felt tight, like everyone was waiting for something. Daniel met me in the hallway. "Dad's in the kitchen." His voice was careful. Measured. "Did she call you?" he asked quietly. "Who?" "Diane." I shook my head. "She left early this morning. Took 2 suitcases." That wasn't retreat. That was preparation. My father was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked like he hadn't slept. When he saw the folder in my hand, something flickered in his eyes. Fear. "Dad," I said calmly, "did Diane ever handle Grandma's paperwork after the funeral?" Silence. His jaw tightened. "She helped organize things." "Did you give her access to the office?" "Yes." The word came out slower this time. I placed the documents on the table. He read the amended will first, then the clause, then the note about removed documents. His hands began to shake again. Not dramatically, just slightly. "She told me," his voice was rough, "she told me your grandmother was confused near the end." There it was. Isolation tactic. Undermine credibility. Control narrative. "I need you to answer something honestly," I said. He looked up. "When she started questioning whether I was yours, did you defend me?" The silence lasted too long. Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind me. "I didn't know what to say," my father admitted. Not I believed her. Not I agreed. I didn't know what to say. Neutral. Again. Neutrality has consequences. Daniel stepped forward unexpectedly. "Dad, this isn't just about Stella anymore." My father looked at him. "She's been controlling everything. Finances, conversations, even who visits. You don't see it because you don't want to." That was new. Daniel had never challenged him before. "Your wife just left on our wedding night," Daniel continued. "Do you think that's random?" The room shifted. The wedding stakes returned. This wasn't isolated damage. It was spreading. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time I answered in front of them. "Miss Frost," a woman's voice said, cool and composed. "You should really speak to your father before you make assumptions." "Diane." "Of course." "Assumptions about what?" I asked evenly. "About who really pushed your grandmother to change that will." My father looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" he demanded. Diane exhaled softly into the phone. "Richard, sweetheart, tell her who drove Eleanor to those appointments." My stomach dropped. I was the one who took Grandma to her lawyer. Because my father was busy. Because Diane had meetings. "You're implying I manipulated her?" I asked. "I'm implying," Diane said gently, "that courts care about influence." There it was, her counterattack. Not emotional. Legal. If the will could be contested? If she could suggest I influenced an elderly woman, everything could freeze. Assets, ownership, reputation. "You intercepted documents," I said quietly. A pause. "That's a serious accusation," she replied smoothly. "Did you remove letters from the office?" Silence. Then you have no proof. Click. She hung up. The kitchen felt different now. Less like a home, more like a battlefield. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. No, I said calmly. It's strategic. My father looked at me in a way he hadn't before, not uncertain, not doubtful, studying, as if he was finally seeing the full structure of what had been built around him. I trusted her, he whispered. Yes, I said, you did. And trust misused becomes weaponized. An hour later, Mr. Alderman called again. There's one more thing, he said. What? The amendment wasn't the last document your grandmother signed. My chest tightened. There's a codicil, an addition. And? I asked carefully. It transfers immediate ownership of the property upon formal confirmation of paternity. The air left my lungs. Immediate ownership. Not shared, not delayed. Immediate. Immediate. When does that activate? I asked. It already has. The room went very still. Because if ownership transferred, if the house legally became mine, then Diane had left before being formally notified. She knew something was coming. She had prepared. And she was not done. So what happens now? I closed the blue box. We secure the house. My father blinked. Secure? She has keys, I said calmly. And if she's contesting the will, she may try to claim occupancy rights. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was tactical. The basement years had taught me survival. The wedding had taught me exposure. Now it was time for structure. As I walked upstairs to what used to be my bedroom, Lauren's bedroom, I paused at the door. Sunlight poured through the window. The maple tree outside had grown taller, older, rooted. I stepped inside, not to reclaim it, but to measure it. Ownership feels different than permission. And as I stood there, my phone vibrated one more time. A message from an unknown number. A photo. It was of my grandmother's office desk. Open drawer. Empty. Caption beneath it, "You don't know everything." No name. But I knew who it was. Diane wasn't running. She was repositioning. And if she had one more document, one more narrative, one more move, this wasn't over. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not publicly. Because once lawyers are involved, truth doesn't just settle, it gets tested. The contest. By Tuesday, Diane had filed. Not emotionally. Legally. Petition to contest the will of Eleanor Frost. Grounds: undue influence, questionable mental capacity, improper execution of amended documents. I stared at the scanned copy Mr. Alderman emailed me. It was structured. Precise. Prepared. She hadn't written that overnight. She'd been waiting. The first hearing was scheduled within 3 weeks. 3 weeks for our family to become a case number. 3 weeks for wedding whispers to turn into community gossip. 3 weeks for my father to decide where he stood. Because he had to choose now. Neutral doesn't survive courtrooms. Daniel came over that evening. No tie. No wedding glow. Just exhaustion. She moved into Lauren's apartment, he said. Of course she did. Strategic retreat, not collapse. The bride's parents are asking questions, he added quietly, about what kind of family she married into. There it was. Wedding stakes escalating. Damage spreading outward. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For not seeing it sooner. I nodded. Growth doesn't need speeches, just shifts. The lawyers' strategy meeting felt like war planning. Mr. Alderman laid it out calmly. She's going to argue you isolated Eleanor from your father. I didn't isolate her, I said. You drove her to appointments. Yes, because no one else would. He nodded. Intent matters, but perception wins cases. That line stayed with me. Perception wins cases. That's how Diane had operated for years. Atmosphere. Suggestion. Doubt. Now she was trying to move that same strategy into a courtroom. Is there anything else? I asked carefully. Mr. Alderman hesitated. There is one thing. He slid another document forward. Bank statements, transfers, large ones, from my father's joint account with Diane into a private account under her name over the past 5 years. Slow, consistent, significant. She's been preparing financially, he said. If the will stands, she walks away comfortable. If it falls, she gains leverage. This wasn't emotional panic. This was calculated positioning. That night, I confronted my father. Not angrily, directly. She moved money. His face drained of color. How much? I told him. He sat down heavily. I thought she was managing investments. She was, I said quietly. Just not yours. Silence. Then something changed in him. Not guilt. Not shame. Clarity. I'll testify, he said. For what? For what she did. For what I allowed. That mattered. Not because it fixed the past, but because it altered the future. The first court appearance wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no gasps, just fluorescent lighting and procedural language. Diane looked immaculate. Cream suit. Controlled posture. Not emotional. Composed. When she saw me, she smiled slightly. Like this was a chessboard. Her attorney argued smoothly. Miss Frost had direct control over Eleanor Frost's transportation, appointments, and emotional support during a vulnerable period. Vulnerable period. They were reframing devotion as manipulation. My lawyer countered with documentation, medical assessments, witness statements, timing records, structure against suggestion. But then Diane did something I didn't expect. She requested a temporary injunction on property access, claiming she had residency rights. If granted, she could legally re-enter the house, live there, delay everything. It was bold, aggressive, strategic. Outside the courtroom, Daniel pulled me aside. She texted my wife. My stomach tightened. What did she say? That this family destroys marriages. There it was again. Psychological warfare. If she couldn't win property immediately, she'd destabilize relationships. The bride was already quiet at home, watching, measuring, deciding what she married into. Diane wasn't just contesting a will. She was pressuring every bond connected to it. The judge denied immediate residency, temporary relief. But not victory. The full hearing was scheduled. Discovery phase initiated. Financial audits approved. That part made Diane's smile fade. Because audits don't care about narrative. They care about numbers. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. Lauren called me. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Her voice was shaking. I didn't know, she said immediately. Know what? She told me Grandma changed the will because you threatened her. I closed my eyes. Layered manipulation. She said if I didn't support her in court, she'd cut me off financially. There it was. Control through dependency. Lauren, I said gently, you don't owe me loyalty. Just honesty. A long silence. Then, she has more documents. My chest tightened. What kind? I don't know. But she keeps saying, Stella doesn't know everything. That phrase again. The photo. The empty drawer. One more move. That night, I went back to the blue box. I hadn't re-examined everything. Not carefully, not fully. Inside the lining, beneath the velvet base, something felt uneven. I pressed down. It shifted. There was a hidden compartment. Small, flat. Inside was a folded envelope. No address. Just one word written in my grandmother's handwriting, if necessary. My pulse pounded. I opened it slowly. Inside was a notarized statement. Signed, dated, recorded. In it, my grandmother described specific conversations, dates, times, instances where Diane questioned my paternity in her presence, encouraged my father to seek confirmation, suggested I be moved downstairs. Documented. Witnessed by her longtime neighbor. This wasn't emotional memory. It was recorded testimony. And at the bottom, one final line. If this letter is opened, it means the manipulation continued longer than I hoped. Protect the house. Protect yourself. I sat back slowly. because this wasn't defense. This was counterattack. The next hearing would change everything. Not because of DNA, not because of inheritance, but because Diane's strategy relied on subtlety, on doubt, on atmosphere. And for the first time, we had documentation that turned suggestion into pattern, and pattern into intent. I looked at the house around me, the kitchen, the staircase, the basement door, the sunlight in the bedroom upstairs. Ownership isn't just legal, it's psychological. And for the first time in 18 years, I didn't feel displaced. I felt prepared. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered calmly. You found it, Diane said. Not a question. A statement. Yes, I replied. Silence. Then, softer than before, you have no idea what your father would have lost if I hadn't stepped in. That was new. Not attack. Justification. What did you protect him from? I asked. Another pause. You'll see, she said. Click. She hung up. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if we were uncovering a lie or walking toward a deeper truth. The thing, she said. You have no idea what your father would have lost if I hadn't stepped in. That sentence didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. And that unsettled me more than anything she'd said before. The second hearing was packed. Not with strangers, with family. Extended relatives who suddenly cared. Neighbors who had always wondered. Daniel sat behind me, his wife beside him. Composed, but distant. My father looked smaller than he ever had. Not weak, just stripped of illusion. Diane entered last. Calm. Cream suit again. Hair pulled back. No tremor in her hands. If this was war, she had trained for it. Mr. Alderman presented the notarized letter first. Grandma's statement. Clear. Dated. Specific. The courtroom grew quieter with every paragraph. When he read the line about Diane suggesting I be moved to the basement, something shifted audibly. A murmur. Because now it wasn't interpretation, it was pattern. Diane's attorney objected. Overruled. The letter was admitted. Diane didn't react. Not outwardly. But her jaw tightened. Then came the financial audit. Transfers confirmed. Timelines aligned with key emotional events. When paternity doubts increased, transfers increased. When Grandma amended the will. A large withdrawal. Structure. Intent. Not chaos. Strategy. My father closed his eyes. And for once, I didn't feel anger toward him. Just a strange, heavy understanding. Manipulation doesn't look like evil. It looks like concern. Like partnership. Like someone saying, let me handle that. Then Diane stood. And everything changed. I would like to make a statement, she said. Her attorney hesitated. She didn't. Permission granted. She turned toward the judge. Not toward me. Not toward my father. I did question Stella's paternity, she said calmly. A ripple through the room. I did encourage Richard to seek confirmation. Another ripple. And yes, I believed Eleanor was being influenced in her final months. Her voice never shook. Because 18 years ago, Margaret Frost had an affair. The word landed hard. Affair. My father's head snapped up. Daniel inhaled sharply. I felt the ground tilt. That is speculation, my lawyer said immediately. Diane didn't look at him. She confessed it to me, Diane continued. Before she died. The courtroom shifted. My father stood abruptly. That's a lie. But his voice cracked. And cracks create space. She was dying, Diane said softly. She told me she wasn't sure. Not sure. 2 words. 18 years of damage inside them. I felt heat rise in my chest, not fear, not even hurt, something colder. Because this was the final tactic. If she couldn't win legally, she would reopen doubt emotionally, destroy certainty, even if the DNA stood. If my father believed Margaret had confessed uncertainty, the psychological wound would reopen. And juries are human. My lawyer objected again. Demanded evidence. Diane lifted her chin. I don't have a recording, she admitted. It was a private conversation. Convenient. Unverifiable. Poison without proof. The judge reminded the court that DNA evidence had already established paternity conclusively. But damage isn't logical, it's emotional. And Diane knew that. The hearing recessed for lunch. The hallway buzzed. Whispers, phones out, speculation growing legs. Daniel pulled me aside. "Did Mom ever say anything like that to you?" "No." He searched my face. For cracks, for doubt. He didn't find any. Because here's what Diane underestimated. If my mother had been unsure, she would have tested it. Quietly. Privately. Not lived 18 years under suspicion. Margaret Frost was many things. Weak wasn't one of them. My father stood alone near the window. I walked toward him. Slowly. "You don't believe her," I said. He didn't answer immediately, and that pause hurt more than anything Diane said in court. Finally, "I don't know what to believe anymore." There it was. The real damage. Not property, not money. Uncertainty. Reopened. Diane hadn't attacked legally. She'd attacked psychologically. Again. The afternoon session resumed. And this time, Lauren stood. Unexpected, unplanned. She asked to speak. Her voice shook. "I need to correct something." Diane's composure flickered. "Just slightly. My mom told me about that supposed confession years ago," Lauren continued. "But she also told me to never repeat it unless it was necessary." Necessary. The word echoed. She said if things ever got bad legally, it would remind Richard why he doubted Stella in the first place. The courtroom went very still. Because that wasn't memory. That was strategy. Planned deployment. Stored ammunition. Diane's attorney tried to intervene. Too late. The damage had shifted direction. Lauren turned toward my father. She said doubt keeps people controllable. There it was. Not love. Not protection. Control. The judge called for order. But the narrative had broken open. This wasn't about an affair. It was about manufactured insecurity. Sustained. Leveraged. Repeated. When court adjourned for the day, the air felt different. Not resolved, but clearer. Diane didn't look at me this time. She looked at Lauren. And in that look, something cracked. Not defeat. Exposure. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Local media had picked up the story. Inheritance battles always attract curiosity. Daniel shielded his wife from questions. My father walked beside me. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. Small shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was the first time he said it without hesitation. And that mattered more than property ever could. That night, I returned to the house alone, sat in the kitchen, listened to the hum of the refrigerator. 18 years of atmosphere, of suggestion, of quiet narrative shaping. Diane hadn't destroyed our family. She had exploited its weakest point, doubt. And doubt survives best in silence. But silence was over. The final ruling would come in days. The will, the transfers, the residency claim. All of it would be decided. But what Diane lost today was control of the story. And once a manipulator loses narrative control, they become reactive, desperate, dangerous. My phone buzzed. One message, from Diane. "You think this is finished? Ask your father about 2004. The year my mother got sick. The year everything blurred. The year I stopped sleeping upstairs." I stared at the screen. Because maybe, just maybe, there was still one piece missing. And if 2004 held something real, not planted, not manipulated. Then the truth wasn't done unfolding. 2004. 2004 was the year the house got quiet, not peaceful, muted, like everyone had agreed not to ask certain questions out loud. My mother got sick that spring, not dramatically at first, just tired. Headaches, long naps in the afternoon. I was 11, old enough to notice, too young to understand. My father traveled more that year. "Work's intense," he said. Diane didn't exist in our lives yet, at least not officially. After Diane's message, I drove to the only person who might still remember 2004 clearly. Mrs. Halpern, Grandma's neighbor, the same one who witnessed the notarized statement. She opened the door slowly, leaning on her cane. "You look like Eleanor tonight," she said. That wasn't comfort. It was warning. "Did my mom ever talk to you in 2004? I asked carefully. Mrs. Halpern studied my face, then stepped aside. "Yes," she said. "Once." We sat at her kitchen table. The same floral vinyl from 20 years ago. "She came over crying," Mrs. Halpern said. Said she'd found something in Richard's briefcase. My pulse slowed. "What?" "A hotel receipt, 2 glasses of champagne charged to a room." The air shifted. She thought he was having an affair. Mrs. Having an affair. Halpern continued. But she didn't confront him immediately. She wanted proof. My stomach turned. Because this was new. This wasn't Diane whispering doubt. This was before Diane officially existed. "Did she ever find proof?" I asked. Mrs. Halpern shook her head. "She got sick before she could." I drove straight to my father's house. Our house. He was in the living room, lights off, staring at nothing. 2004, I said. His shoulders stiffened. "What about it?" "Mom found something in your briefcase." Silence. Long. Heavy. Then he stood. Walked to the kitchen. Poured water he didn't drink. "You were a child," he said quietly. "You don't need to dig into that." That's not an answer. He closed his eyes. And when he opened them, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Regret. "Yes," he said. "I met someone for drinks." My chest tightened. "Diane?" "No." The word came fast. Defensive. It was a colleague. It lasted a month. I ended it. My pulse roared in my ears. "Did Mom know?" "She suspected." He swallowed. "She asked me once. I denied it." There it was. The fracture. The first crack. "You lied to her," I said. "Yes." The honesty was brutal. Clean. Ugly. "Was I yours?" I asked. His head snapped toward me. "Don't. Answer me." His voice broke for the first time in my life. "Yes." No hesitation. No uncertainty. "Yes." "Then why didn't you fight harder when Diane started planting doubt?" The question hung between us. Because now we were past manipulation. Past narrative. This was core truth. He sat down heavily. "Because guilt makes you vulnerable," he said. There it was. "I betrayed your mother," he continued. "So when Diane suggested you might not be mine, part of me felt like I deserved the punishment." The words landed slowly. He didn't doubt me because of evidence. He doubted me because he doubted himself. Self-loathing is easy to redirect. Diane hadn't created insecurity. She found it. And fed it, she told me. He said quietly. That if you weren't mine, it would explain everything. Explain what? Why your mother pulled away? Why she got distant? Why she seemed sad? He looked at me. And for the first time, I saw the full picture. He had an affair. My mother suspected. She got sick before resolving it. He carried guilt. Diane entered years later. She sensed the weakness and built doubt on top of it. Not because there was proof, because there was vulnerability. "Mom never confessed anything to her," I said. "No," he replied immediately. Margaret would never have confided in Diane. There it was, certainty. Finally. The DNA test had proven biology. But this proved narrative. Diane's final weapon had been a fabrication built on an old wound. The final court hearing came a week later. Lauren testified again. The financial audit findings were presented in full. The notarized letter entered permanent record. And this time, when Diane's attorney attempted to reference the 2004 uncertainty, my father stood, without being prompted. "I had an affair in 2004, he said clearly. The courtroom froze. It had nothing to do with my daughter's paternity. My guilt made me susceptible to manipulation. That's on me, not her. Silence. Then the judge nodded slowly. Because clarity changes everything. The ruling came 2 days later. The amended will stood. The codicil activated. Ownership confirmed. Financial transfers flagged for civil review. Diane's residency claim denied permanently. Case closed. Legally. But closure isn't loud. It's quiet. It looks like paperwork signed in triplicate. It looks like keys placed on a counter. It looks like a house that finally feels still. Diane moved out of state within a month. No dramatic goodbye, no final speech, just absence. Lauren texted me once. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I told her the truth. You were raised inside it too." Daniel's marriage stabilized slowly, not instantly. Trust takes maintenance, especially when it's introduced to chaos early. But they stayed. They chose each other. That mattered. One evening, weeks after everything ended, my father came to the house. He didn't knock like a stranger. He didn't walk in like an owner. He waited. When I opened the door, he held out the old basement light switch plate. "I found this in the garage," he said. It still had tape residue on it, from my honor roll certificate. "I was wrong," he said again. Not defensive, not dramatic, just consistent. "I know," I replied. Forgiveness isn't instant, but acknowledgement is a start. We walked through the house together, upstairs, into the bedroom that used to be mine. Sunlight through the maple leaves. 18 years. Basement to ownership. Doubt to documentation. Silence to testimony. Truth doesn't explode. It settles. But sometimes, it also rebuilds. The hardest part wasn't proving I belonged. It wasn't winning in court. It wasn't exposing manipulation. It was deciding whether I still wanted this family. And one afternoon, standing in the kitchen where doubt once lived, I chose carefully, not blindly, not emotionally, deliberately. Family isn't automatic. It's constructed, maintained, protected. And this time, if it breaks, it won't be because no one spoke. If this story touched you, subscribe to Silent Tales Studio and like the video. Your support helps these stories reach the hearts that need them.